All right. So if you've ever built a React component and it didn't perform the way you expected, maybe something didn't load properly, maybe the data didn't display, maybe an animation didn't show, well, or it could have just been an infinite loop. Well, today I want to talk about a hook in React that can kind of care for that and help you kind of mitigate some of those delays with your website, and that's useEffect. And I know this could be extremely confusing for beginners to learn. I know I was a little confused with it at first, but I'm going to keep it simple with a high level overview, and hopefully you have a better understanding of what exactly it does and how you can leverage it in your projects moving forward. So what is useEffect? So think of it like this. In React, your component is going to render, and that is basically displaying a UI or whatever's inside of the return statement based upon what's in your JSX. If you need something done after the component has rendered, that's where useEffect comes into play. And this could be anything from fetching data, displaying a loading animation, or whatever it is that you like for it to do. useEffect is the React hook that kind of helps with these things. The main three things that it is good for is, like I mentioned, is displaying data after a render. Initially, that component is going to render first, and then from there, you may want to fetch data from local storage, or maybe from an API, or maybe from a database that you may have connected. This is where you can use useEffect to kind of help pull that data while you're retrieving it from the database. Typically, what users like to do is, or excuse me, developers like to do is display some form of loading animation or a pending state while you're waiting on that data to be fetched from the database. So that's one way that you can use useEffect, and it is extremely dependable and helpful. The second thing is it can depend on things. So what I mean by that is in useEffect, you can define a dependency, and you can also pass in a empty array, and it'll basically unmount that component once you pass in that information. So like, let's say if you wanted to pass in count inside of that array and not have it empty, every time the count state variable is updated, useEffect is going to do something to the UI so that you can now display that count on screen, or update that count, excuse me, on screen to the user. It basically gives you a little more control over the component and how it is rendering and displaying to the user. The other thing it is good for is cleanup. So you may have a application where you are listening for a key press, and once that key press take place, you're going to have a unmount, or you may want the UI to re-render. Well, you can include a function inside of useEffect so that it doesn't continue to re-render and the UI is cleaned up. This is extremely important as it relates to overall performance of the application, and just making sure that the end user or the customer consumer has a good interaction or good experience with your website. So here's a quick example of how exactly useEffect works. So here on screen, we'll start by importing the useEffect and useState hook from React. We'll create a function named title update. In it, we'll have a state variable that will be set to initial string, and that initial string will be set to the variable state name of name, and we'll also include set name. Inside of useEffect, we'll basically pass in some temporal literals so that we'll display hello, the user's name once it's entered, and also world or whatever it is that you like to pass in. And notice that we're going to pass in name inside of the array that we're calling back inside of useEffect, so that every time the name value is updated, we're going to be updating it with the title, or we're going to be updating it on screen based upon the name that's entered. Inside of the return statement, we'll have an input. The value will be set to name. This was from the useState variable that we created a moment ago. And we'll include an onChange handler so that anytime that we have a change, it's going to be listening for it. We're going to automatically update the UI so that we can see that displayed on screen. And then finally, the placeholder inside of the input will be asking the user to enter a name. And as you can see on screen, every time we enter the name or it is updated, the page doesn't re-render, but useEffect does render or provide an update to the state of the UI, so that every time that it is updated, we see the text of hello and the name that's entered. And in this event, we're just going to enter in hello, the JA dad. That's my YouTube channel, so we'll just include that. But that's basically how useEffect works quickly in a nutshell. So if you need to do something that needs to take place after the component has rendered, whether it's syncing data, fetching data, interacting with local storage, or just updating the count, useEffect is the appropriate hook to use. And you also have a little more flexibility to improve the overall user experience. So I hope you enjoyed this quick tutorial. If you did, give me a like. Let me know how you typically use useEffect in your React front-end applications. I'd love to hear all about it. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.